So you're diving into Bitcoin, huh? That's exciting. But you probably heard some of the buzz about quantum computers and, whether they could actually threaten crypto. Could this super powerful tech really, I don't know, crack the code and, leave Bitcoin vulnerable? That's what we're going to try to figure out today.
Yeah, it's a question a lot of people are asking.
Right, right. So we've got this interesting piece from the Motley Fool, Think You Know Bitcoin. Here's one little known fact you can't overlook, catchy title. And it basically dives into this whole idea of whether Bitcoin's strength, the thing a lot of people like about it is unchanging nature, could actually backfire with all this new tech coming out.
It is sort of a paradox when you think about it. The very thing that makes Bitcoin appealing to many, that fixed supply of 21 million coins, its immutability as a hedge against inflation, is the same thing that could be seen as a weakness when you're talking about something as potentially disruptive as quantum computing.
Yeah, exactly. Can it really keep up if it can't change? The article mentions quantum computers and how they can find patterns crazy fast, which is, how encryption gets cracked. What does that even mean for Bitcoin transactions? If someone can just break the code, is anyone's Bitcoin actually safe?
So, to understand that, we have to look at how Bitcoin transactions are secured in the first place. It relies on something called public key cryptography. It's a system where you have two keys. There's a public key that everyone knows, and then a private key that only you know.
Okay.
It's kind of like, think of it like a mailbox with two slots, one for sending mail, one for receiving. Anyone can send you mail through the public key slot, but only you can unlock and read the mail with your private key.
Okay, yeah, I get that. The mailbox, yeah. So where does quantum computing fit into all of this?
Right. Well, quantum computers are really good at solving certain types of math problems, the kind that this public key cryptography is based on. So, theoretically, if someone had a powerful enough quantum computer, they could potentially crack the code, figure out your private key, and then, they could access your Bitcoin. That's the concern.
That sounds pretty scary, to be honest. Is that what the article's saying?
Yeah.
That Bitcoin is doomed?
No, not exactly. It actually points out that Bitcoin, while designed for stability, it's not completely frozen in time. There's Bitcoin Core, the software that runs the whole system.
Yeah, right, yeah. It's like the operating system, right, for Bitcoin. Like Windows or iOS for your phone.
Yeah, exactly. And just like those operating systems get updates, so does Bitcoin Core. They can address bugs, improve efficiency, even implement completely new features.
So it's more like Bitcoin is getting regular security upgrades then to stay ahead of the bad guys.
Right.
But then wouldn't that change the whole system if they're constantly updating it?
Well, that's where the concept of the blockchain comes in. Think of it like a giant public ledger, and it keeps track of every single Bitcoin transaction ever made.
Nope.
And this ledger, it's constantly being updated and verified by a huge network of computers all over the world. So to make any change to the system, you need a majority of those computers to agree on the change.
So it's like a democracy for Bitcoin then, majority rules.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. It's a process called consensus, and it's really crucial for Bitcoin's security and stability. It means no single person or group can just decide to change things on a whim. Any update, even a security upgrade, has to go through this whole process of consensus.
Okay, so Bitcoin can actually adapt then. That makes me feel a bit better.
And there's actually more good news. The article highlights that the tools for this adaptation already exist. You've got organizations like the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they're called NIST, and they've been working on something called quantum-resistant encryption. They're developing new cryptographic algorithms that are much, much harder for even quantum computers to break.
So is Bitcoin using that then, this quantum-resistant encryption?
Not yet, but it's definitely not out of the question. Think of it like this. NIST sets the standards, right? Then companies like IBM and Microsoft, they build those standards into their systems. So we're already seeing these quantum-resistant security measures being implemented in the real world.
Oh, that's interesting. So if they can do it, Bitcoin can too. I mean, it's not like quantum computers are some far-off thing anymore, right? They're here.
Exactly. And the fact that companies are already implementing quantum-resistant security, it shows that it is a feasible solution for Bitcoin, too. It's not just some theoretical idea. It's practical. It's really just a matter of the Bitcoin community getting on board and implementing those changes through that consensus process we were talking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. But changing something as fundamental as the encryption that protects Bitcoin, that must be a pretty huge undertaking, right?
It is. It's a big deal. And that's actually what we're going to explore next. Like, how does the Bitcoin community actually go about deciding on and implementing these big changes? What are the challenges? And, maybe most importantly for our listeners, what does all this mean for you if you're interested in Bitcoin?
Those are all great questions, yeah. We're going to dig into all of that right after this. All right, so we've talked about how Bitcoin can adapt and that quantum-resistant solutions are out there.
Yeah.
But how does this actually work in practice? Like, who decides when to implement these changes? It's not like Bitcoin has a CEO or a board of directors making decisions, right?
You're exactly right. It's not a typical company structure. It all comes back to that blockchain and consensus idea we were discussing earlier. Any change to Bitcoin, especially something as big as implementing new encryption, would need a huge majority of the network to agree to it.
So it's like what? A giant online vote or something?
You could think of it that way, but instead of casting votes, people signal their agreement by running the updated software.
Okay, so if enough people are running the new software, it becomes the official version.
Exactly. It's a gradual process. As more and more people adopt the change, it gets reflected in the blockchain, and eventually it becomes the standard.
Wow, that's pretty wild. It's like a self-governing system.
It is. And it's actually one of Bitcoin's biggest strengths. Because to attack it now, you wouldn't just need to, crack the code. You'd need to control a majority of the computing power of the entire network.
Yeah, good luck with that. So how do they make sure everyone's on board with these updates? Do you have to, individually convince every single person running Bitcoin?
Not exactly. A lot of it comes down to the developers who create and propose the changes. They have to make a really strong case for why this update is necessary and beneficial for the whole system.
So it's like a giant open forum where developers are pitching their ideas and trying to get people on board.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. And it's not just developers. There are also miners, the people who use their computers to verify transactions and add them to the blockchain. They play a huge role in this whole process, too.
Oh, right, because they're the ones who are actually, processing everything.
Exactly. So for a major change to happen, you need both the developers and a significant number of miners to agree to it. It's like a checks and balances system.
It all seems very decentralized.
It is. And that's the beauty of it. No single person or group has control over the whole system. And all these discussions and debates about updates, it's not happening in secret. Anyone can participate, contribute ideas, look at the code, and give their feedback. It's completely transparent.
That's pretty cool, actually. It's like a true democracy in action. But it does make me think, what if there's some really urgent threat? What if someone actually manages to build a quantum computer that can crack Bitcoin's current encryption? Would the system be vulnerable during that transition period while everyone's getting on board with the new stuff?
That's a great question, and it's a legitimate concern. It's sort of like updating your computer's antivirus software. There's always that slight window of vulnerability while you're downloading and installing the update.
Oh, right, yeah.
But just like with your computer, there are things in place to try and minimize that risk. Constant monitoring, people looking for threats and vulnerabilities. The Bitcoin community, they're generally pretty quick to respond to potential problems.
So it's a race against time, but Bitcoin has some pretty good defenses in place.
It does. And that brings us back to a key point from the article. The ability for Bitcoin to adapt, to change, and evolve, it's crucial to its long-term survival.
Which is kind of ironic when you think about its reputation as this, fixed, unchanging thing.
Exactly. But that fixed supply of 21 million coins, it's really about controlling inflation and making sure Bitcoin stays scarce. That's different from the system's ability to adapt and evolve to meet new challenges.
Okay, so we've talked about the update process, the potential for this quantum-resistant encryption, but what about that 21 million coin limit? A lot of people see that as a core feature of Bitcoin. Could that ever change?
I think that's a question a lot of people have.
Yeah.
Because if you could just change the supply anytime you wanted, what would stop someone from just creating a ton of new Bitcoin and making the existing ones less valuable?
Yeah, it would be like printing money, wouldn't it?
Exactly. And you know what? The article actually talks about this directly, and it makes a pretty good case for why that 21 million coin cap is very unlikely to change.
Okay, I'm curious. What makes it so unlikely?
Well, for one thing, changing it would be incredibly difficult. You'd need that consensus from the network, just like with any other major update. And as we've seen, getting everyone to agree on a big change like that is not easy.
So you're saying it's not like someone could just wake up one morning and decide to print a bunch of new Bitcoin?
Nope, not at all. It would require a huge majority of the network to be on board. And that brings us to the second reason it's unlikely to change. Incentives.
Incentives? What do you mean?
Think about it. The people who are in the best position to change something like that, the miners and developers, they're also the ones who are most invested in Bitcoin. They own a lot of it themselves.
Oh, right, yeah. So if they change the limit, they'd basically be devaluing their own holdings.
Exactly. It would be like shooting themselves in the foot. And that's why the article suggests that the 21 million coin limit is probably here to stay.
So it's like a built-in safeguard then. The very people who could change it have a strong incentive not to.
You got it. And all of this really emphasizes just how important it is to understand the technology behind any investment, especially something as complex and dynamic as cryptocurrency.
But it's not enough to just watch the price go up and down.
Yeah.
You really have to understand what's happening under the hood.
I completely agree. And that's what I think is so fascinating about this whole discussion about Bitcoin and quantum computing. It shows us that something that seems really rigid and unchanging on the surface actually has this remarkable ability to adapt and evolve.
Which leads us to, I think, an even bigger question. What other challenges are out there, not just for Bitcoin, but for all cryptocurrencies? Like, what could the future hold? So we've talked about quantum computers, how Bitcoin can adapt the 21 million coin limit. But it feels like we're just scratching the surface here. What other big challenges are out there? Not just for Bitcoin, but for crypto in general. Like, what could the future hold? It makes you wonder.
It really does. And while the article gives us reason to be optimistic about Bitcoin's ability to handle quantum computing, focusing on just one threat might be a bit short-sighted.
Yeah, because the world of tech is constantly changing, right? Like what's a huge deal today might be nothing tomorrow.
Exactly. That brings us back to this idea of adaptability, right? I mean, think about it. Bitcoin was designed over a decade ago, and back then, the idea of quantum computers being an actual threat, it was practically science fiction.
And now here we are seriously talking about it.
Yeah.
So what other science fiction stuff should we be thinking about now? What's next?
Well, one thing that jumps out is artificial intelligence, AI. It's developing so fast, and it really could disrupt every industry out there, including finance.
Oh, interesting. So how could AI impact Bitcoin?
In a lot of ways, potentially. For example, AI could be used to create even more complex trading algorithms, which could mean even more volatility in the crypto markets. Imagine an AI that could analyze, like, everything, market trends, news, even what people are saying on social media, all in real time, and then making trades based on that.
That's kind of scary, actually. It sounds like it could make the market even more unpredictable.
It could, definitely. And then there's security. We have to think about the possibility of AI being used for bad stuff, too. Could a really advanced AI find weaknesses in the Bitcoin protocol that we haven't even thought of? It's a question worth asking.
So it's like a race then. As the tools for good get better, the tools for bad get better too.
It's a good way to think about it. And that's why it's important to always be looking ahead, trying to stay one step ahead when it comes to security. The Bitcoin community will have to keep being proactive, like they are with quantum computing, to make sure they're ready for whatever comes next.
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility, but it's also kind of exciting, don't you think? Being on the cutting edge like that, where the rules are still being written.
I agree. And that's why it's so important for anyone who's into crypto to go beyond the hype, to dig in and really understand the tech and the good and the bad that comes with it. You got to be informed.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really want listeners to remember? What's the takeaway message here?
I think the biggest thing is this. In technology, the only thing that stays the same is that everything changes. You got to be willing to change with it, be curious, be adaptable, and always be ready to learn.
That's a great point. We've covered a lot today, from quantum computers to AI, the importance of adapting. A lot to think about. But hopefully this conversation has given you a new way to think about Bitcoin, about crypto in general, and really about this whole crazy world of technology that's constantly changing around us. So keep asking those questions, keep learning, and remember, the future is what we make it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.